Good morning everyone and welcome to this Learning Network New Zealand webinar. Thanks for joining us. I'm Danielle Hart. I'm the Marketing and Events Manager at Learning Network. I hope the technology is working for you and that you can see and hear us all okay. In a moment I will hand over to Helen from Magpie Media and she'll run through the finer points of the webinar technology. But first I'd like to welcome Professor Bill Lucas, who's joined us now from the UK. Hi Bill, how are you?
Hi, I'm really good and lovely to be with you.
Fantastic. How's everything in the Northern Hemisphere?
It's probably not as good as it is in the Southern Hemisphere, but we're feeling pretty good after the Olympics.
I bet. Well, thanks Bill, and now here's Helen to run through some of the webinar features. Hi Helen.
Hi Danielle, thanks for that. Morning everybody. So I just want to familiarise you with the GoToWebinar platform this morning. So looking at the right of your screen now, you'll see a control panel like the one on the slide, and this is what you're going to use to interact with our webinar today. At the end of today's presentation there will be a question and answer session with Bill, and so looking towards the bottom of your control panel now you'll see a questions box, and this is where you can type in your questions on your control panel for Bill or Danielle and send them through at any time. If you have any technical questions or problems that I can help you with, you can either type these into the question box or just raise your hand for attention and I'll come back to you. So to raise your hand, if you look now towards the left of the control panel, you'll see an area that we call the grab tab hanging from the side of it. And so this is effectively a mini control panel. And at the bottom of that is an icon with a hand with an up arrow. So by clicking on that with your mouse, your hand will be raised. If you have difficulty with your internet connection today and drop off from the webinar broadcast, all you need to do is use your original access link to rejoin. Now the webinar is being recorded and will be made available for later viewing. So to help you make the most of the experience this morning, I suggest that you just take a moment now to ensure that your phones are turned to silent and that any programs you have open on your computer that might upload or download during the broadcast, that these are closed. So enjoy the presentation. Remember to send your questions through at any time, and I'll pass back to you now, Danielle. Thanks.
Thank you, Helen. And yes, everyone out there in our audience, as Helen mentioned, we do encourage you to post your questions while the webinar is in process, and hopefully we'll have some time at the end for Bill to answer these. Now, just to fill you in on a bit of background, Professor Bill Lucas works alongside Guy Claxton in the UK as co-director of the Centre for Real-World Learning at the University of Winchester. He's written more than 40 books, and his areas of expertise encompass learning, change, creativity and leadership. He's in demand around the world as an entertaining and inspiring speaker and facilitator, and we are very fortunate to have him here with us today to explain how the science of learnable intelligence is bringing new understanding to teachers and learners alike. So I'd like to hand over to you now, Bill. Away you go.
Well, thank you very much, Danielle and Helen. First things first, I'm really looking forward to coming out to New Zealand on the 22nd of October, and I hope if this little taster of what I'll be talking about at various events in New Zealand in the North Island interests you, then I really hope I'll get to meet you when I come over. So my theme is Learnable Intelligence. I'd like to talk about something that some people find difficult. That is that intelligence is not fixed, but that you really can get smarter. Now this is not just some folksy belief. I'm going to try and help you see that there is excellent science to show that whether you're an educator, a parent, or someone working in business, this is vital and not so breaking news. Just fast backwards by about a century and place yourself in Paris. And you might, especially if you've been responsible for the city's special educational needs, you might have been talking to psychologist Alfred Binet. Alfred Binet, better known for his invention, the IQ test, was looking to find ways of getting the best kinds of education to those with special educational needs. The IQ test is often held up as the example of the thing that shows us that intelligence is fixed. I want to start by just reading you something that Alfred Binet said. Here goes. Some recent philosophers have given their moral approval to the deplorable verdict that an individual's intelligence is a fixed quantity, one which cannot be augmented. We must protest and act. Didn't believe that intelligence was fixed. Fast forward now by about 50 years, and we're now in a different country. We're in Russia, and many of you who are students of psychology will know the work of Lev Vygotsky. But even if you don't, you'll know the common sense that he encapsulates here, when he talks about how it's possible for everybody to move out of the comfort zone in which they sit to the grow zone in which they'd like to be. He doesn't phrase it like that, of course, because he's Russian, and his work isn't translated until about the middle of the century. Fancy word alert here, but if you are interested and you're a scholar of psychology, you'll know he calls this the zone of proximal development. That's just a smart way of saying those of us who are working with young people, or indeed adults, need to provide them with scaffolding so they can move from where they are now to where they'd like to be. In other words, that they can get smarter with our help. And then forward a little more, and we're probably now in the 1980s, and we're probably in another country. We're in the United States. And there are a little cluster of thinkers, of which for me the most influential is probably Lauren Resnick, but certainly perhaps the best known is Carol Dweck. And if you've had a chance to look at her work, and I know that many of you in New Zealand are well versed in her thinking, will know of her unimpeachable research, which shows that those young people who actually believe that they can get smarter do indeed do that. Again, as I started by saying, that's no sort of folksy message. That's hard-edged. If you actually believe that you can get smarter, well, hey, it turns out that you can. And during this short talk, I'm going to explain just some of the ways in which this is true. What I want to do now is to draw from a book that I've written with my colleague Guy Claxton, whom many of you will know, called New Kinds of Smart. Let me start with something a little less serious for a Tuesday morning. If you look at that puzzle on your screen, if you're a parent like me, then I'm sure you'll have been faced by this kind of thing before. It's a pretty simple question, and you probably want to say, which is longer? Well, they're both the same. Of course they are. Watch this screen. Oh, no, they're not. They're not in England. They're not in New Zealand. They're not in France. They're not in the United States. They're different. But you thought they were the same. And as I've explored in my book for business, Revolution, where I look at what Charles Darwin might have thought if he'd been on Earth today, I remind you that it's very easy. We're habit-forming creatures, we men and women listening today. It's very easy just simply to default to the thing that you thought last time you looked at a puzzle. Of course, education is not a puzzle. Education is a really joyfully serious business. So this is just a metaphor, and I'd like you to have it in the back of your mind's eye as we go through this talk together. Now, a question for you. Well, to be precise, 4 questions for you. I want to ask you what you think. Are these 4 statements true or false? And when you've had a chance to read them, I'm going to ask you another 4. The first, essentially that intelligence is a one-dimensional commodity, the kind of thing that IQ tests test. The second, that intelligence is relatively fixed. The third, that mind and body are separate. Intelligent activity is located in the mind. And the fourth, that of course we're rational human beings, aren't we? And therefore that's the thing that really matters. And now 5, 6, 7, and 8. The fifth, that intelligence is a personal possession, and using tools which have the effect of making you smarter is a kind of cheating. I don't know if you're like me, but as I started my life out as a teacher, I was invited to rid the classroom of anything that might be intelligent, like a slide rule. Remember that if you've got an old memory, or these days, of course, attaching yourself to Google, or maybe a calculator, or maybe a mobile phone, whatever it is. The sixth is that intelligence is an individual, not a social concept. Those of us who work in schools know that working in groups is of course often seen, unless you're on the sports field playing rugby or in a choir or a music group. Intelligence, when you work with a group, is a kind of cheating. How do I know if that individual was the person who did this, or was it the group? Seventh is that the concept of intelligence is nothing to do with your local habitat, but kind of universal somehow. So you can be smart on the sports field and just as smart in the maths classroom. Ho ho. And lastly, number 8, well, of course, you know, it matters what you do. Intelligence is not divorced from morality or from ethics. Well, in different ways, each of those 8 ideas runs through educational systems across the world today. And yet, when you look at the science says that in each 8 cases, the question I asked you, the answer was false. Now, I'll grant you that in some cases, you might have wanted to say, well, maybe, or well, maybe in certain cases. And this is the kind of subtlety that I'll enjoy exploring with you when I come to be with you in New Zealand. So let's dive a little deeper now, and let's look at the first of these 8 ideas. It's kind of obvious, really, isn't it, if you're a teacher, that intelligence is composite. You're not just good at one thing and that's it. You can't just get through life by being a brilliant physicist or a great geographer or a great musician. Intelligence is made up like the jazz orchestra that you can see on this slide. It's made up of a whole series of different instruments. And what we need to do as individuals and as teachers and as parents and as coaches and as HR directors in companies is we need to cultivate the whole range of our intelligences. However, if you like, many of you will be familiar with the work of Howard Gardner, who broke the mold in this area with his theory of multiple intelligences. And I thank him for that, although he's the first to say that in many cases across the world, in New Zealand and Australia as it happens, he cites examples where school leaders and school teachers have got hold of the wrong end of his multiple intelligence stick, and they've perhaps been too literal in their interpretation of his thinking. We do need to cultivate multiple intelligences, multiple dispositions, but it's not as simple as just simply creating a little wheel, as I've sometimes seen when I go in schools, that shows I'm very good at music or I'm very good at emotional or social intelligence. It's a more complex activity. It is, as Lauren Resnick has put it, the habit of persistently trying to understand things and making them function better. Intelligence is working to figure out things, varying strategies until a workable solution is found. One's intelligence is the sum of one's habits of mind. Now that says something very important to me and to my colleague Guy Claxton. Both of us are very closely associated with the approach to learning known as building learning power. I'm the chairman of the organization that produces these materials. And Guy, as many of you will know, is their originator. The kind of thing that we are talking about is encompassed in this slide, where I put 2 things that we've written together on the same picture, and I add some of the things that I'm passionate about, as well as some of you will be well familiar with his. So I've taken the metaphor of words beginning with R because of the old 3 R's, the writing, reading, and arithmetic. They weren't terribly good spellers, were they? And I've added a few more. So we've had inflation here, and we've got to 6. And these are, I think, wherever you go in the world, whether you're in New Zealand and thinking about your capabilities and your curriculum, as has been and hopefully will be, has been very powerfully supportive of this kind of movement towards wider skills and capabilities and habits of mind. But the shift that I'm talking about is from subjects like reading and writing and arithmetic to broader clusters of skills. Let's start at about midnight on this clock and start with remembering. Well, remembering, of course, is not the remembering of what is the capital of New Zealand. It's the remembering that is about process. How did I do this last time? Did it work for me? Did it help me learn, or was it difficult? And as we move around there, resilience. Resilience is, well, dealing with learning, really, isn't it? Learning is tough. Learning is ambiguous. Learning is difficult. Learning, damn it, doesn't come to us when we need it sometimes. That homework is really difficult to do, and we have to struggle. Resilience is the struggle of learning. It's dealing with the emotions of learning. Reflectiveness is what makes long-term good learners. Reflectiveness is the kind of science of living, really, isn't it? Oh, I'm late for your lesson again, miss. Well, that's a funny thing. Oh, I was late last week as well. Reflectiveness is noticing things that happen to you in the classroom, on the sports field, in the music room, in the kitchen, wherever it is. Responsiveness is Darwin. Responsiveness is doing something about what you notice. I reflect that something, and I do something differently as a result. Reciprocity is just a kind of cute word for working together in groups, and resourcefulness is, for many of you who know Jean Piaget's work, it's kind of his definition of intelligence, knowing what to do when you don't know what to do. I'd argue that anybody who's interested in providing a real opportunity to become a lifelong learner would want the learners that they're teaching and coaching and working with to know what they need to do when they don't know what they might do. So there's a shift. There's a shift abroad. The science supports that shift. So what? So if you're a teacher, it's a Tuesday morning, you're going into work now, you're a school leader, you're a parent, what might you do differently? I think the evidence suggests that what you might do is what Guy and I have called the split screen teaching approach, which is to make sure that whenever you're talking about math or English or geography or science or whatever it is that you're discussing, you're also talking about these wider skills. The second area I want to explore is fundamental to everything I'll say when I'm in New Zealand. Intelligence is expandable. It's learnable. And we need, to use Carol Dweck's phrase, to develop growth mindsets. This is an important idea. The metaphor that Carol Dweck uses is of the mind as a muscle. It's a metaphor that others have used too, but the other metaphors that we have available to us, the mind as a vessel, the mind as a blank slate, the mind as a machine, the mind as a computer, this is a much more powerful metaphor because it reminds us that if we exercise, unlike that great American role model, Homer Simpson, then we have a great chance of getting smarter. Now you remember Homer's mantra. Homer, remember, goal, every time I learn something, it pushes some old stuff out of my brain. There are many people, sadly, that I've worked with. I used to have the privilege of being a head teacher in schools, in universities, in informal community groups, who think like that too. And too many parents too have come to think like that. Of course, the mind doesn't work like that. Luckily, the mind is quite different. In fact, as Lauren Resnick has shown us, those students who over an extended period of time are treated as if they are intelligent actually become more so. Kids who start to believe in their capacity to get better do better. Now when I'm with you, I'll explore more about that, but I think you know, many of you who are online, that you know some of this thinking. So I'm going to pass over to some of the practical implications of a belief in a growth mindset. These would include a very different kind of talk. You can see some of the questions there. These would be good learning lingo, the kind of expressions that you might want to be using in classes that would encompass a belief that said, I know that the children and young people that I work with really can get smarter. Their intelligence is expandable. So those are the kind of expressions that we might expect to see in classrooms where this is believed. In schools that take this seriously, the whole reward system changes. Parents start to praise in different ways. It's no good me saying, well done, aren't you good, aren't you clever, just as you always are. That reinforces my belief that I am, indeed, one of those clever but perhaps slightly brittle learners. What we need to do is notice the things that learners around us really do that helps them to get better. third area I want to talk about is that, of course, if you narrow learning down to the academic, you miss a massive amount of what it is to be human and what it is to be intelligent. Descartes' error was to muddle these two aspects of human beings up. The mind and the body, it turns out, are completely linked. We know this. You know this, don't you? We know this when it comes to dealing with our emotions. We know this when it comes to sweating our way through practicing a different piece, a difficult piece, or learning a new algorithm, or trying a new computer program, or just doing something for the first time. We know, as Jacob Bronowski has said, that the mind and the body and the mind and the hand are not separate. The hand is, in a sense, the ambassador of the mind. It's the cutting edge of the mind. So what? So I say, and I think educators the world over are beginning to realize that this academic vocational divide is ludicrous. We have to give all learners, especially, not occasionally, especially the most academic, the so-called academic, we must give them opportunities for practical work. That great thinker about intelligence, Robert Sternberg, has a lovely little story. You may well know it. It's a nice way of reminding us of how important practical intelligence is. It goes like this. Two hunters in the woods are suddenly confronted by a huge grizzly bear. One immediately gropes in his pack for his trainers and slips them on. The other says scornfully, "You don't think you can outrun an adult grizzly, do you?" "No," says the first. "All I have to do is outrun you." How many people do you know who operate on a brittle academic intelligence, not their fuller intelligence? The fourth area I want to refer to is about intuition. It's a difficult thing, this. Let me talk to you as an adult for a second. Don't tell me, you can't tell me, luckily, but were you to tell me about your love life, or about house purchases or rental decisions you've taken, or indeed any major life decision, I have no doubt that you would not necessarily have done a mathematical equation to figure out whether or not it was the right thing to do. You'll have used your intuition, that part of you which is so important but sits below the surface of your conscious mind. I wonder if we can think more about how we could do that in school. There are schools that we're working with that are beginning to do just that, whether it's through music, through relaxation, through a whole series of range of different techniques. They're beginning to see if young people can be encouraged to access another part of their intelligence. Now, don't get me wrong. You can make some pretty dumb decisions using your intuition. I'm not saying your intuition is right or better than your rational mind. I'm just saying that most of us know we need to heed it. And if we need to catch sight of a glimpse of our inklings and our hunches and our gut feel, then we need to learn how to do that. Of course, it's difficult in a classroom, isn't it? "What are you doing?" "Thinking, miss." "Oh, stop it. Get on with your work," is the cry of many a teacher. Because, praise be, we can't see into kids' minds. So we don't know what they're thinking about. But we might just want to cut them some slack. Not all the time. That would be ridiculous. But just to allow young people to have the chance to develop, to get into that state of flow sometimes where they can access their intuitions. Now, thus far, I've been talking about individual intelligence. Of course, it's not like that, is it? We all know in life, one of our major skills is not just who we are as an individual or what we're like as an individual, but how we get on with others. Intelligence is distributed. It's distributed in two obvious ways. First of all, we use tools, and then I'll come on to we use people to help us. So let's start with the tools idea. Imagine that it's a little time in the future. Let's say it's 2015. You're walking down the street and you're wearing your memo specs. You can see them on the screen in front of you. Too far-fetched, do you think? Well, before you cast doubt on this, there are labs all over the world now trying to put this kind of virtual reality tool into practice. These memo specs have spectacles in which there's a small camera. The camera is in wireless communication with a computer. The computer contains face recognition software and a database of your friends and acquaintances with useful information about their children's names, the meal you had the last time you met, and so on. When the camera computer detects a face it knows, some of this information is fed back to you and is displayed to you on the auto cue built into the spectacles, which function both as vision correctors and as a monitor for the retrieved data. So despite your own fallible memory for people, you can now confidently walk up to your acquaintance and ask after Helen or Monica and reminisce about those fabulous lobsters you shared at the conference in Auckland 7 years ago. Your social intelligence is sneakily augmented by the technology. Or is it? Is that cheating? Or is that a legitimate use of technology? Well, there's a question. Homo sapiens is renowned for his and her inventions. So how do we do that in school? What kit do we allow? Maybe, and I'll explore this when I come to see you, maybe there are different ways of using the equipment, the tools that are around us that encourage us to explore them and to celebrate them rather than to see them as a kind of cheating. Put that calculator away. You may get the decimal point wrong. Intelligence is, of course, social. We need to provide students with strategies for collaboration. Dare I say it, we need to assess this because often what gets assessed gets valued. And in most schools I visit across the world, collaborative activity is not assessed. It's celebrated in sporting or musical performance, but it's not assessed. And yet you and I know one of the most important life skills is getting on with people in the work arena, people we don't necessarily agree with. Sorry, that's politically incorrect. People whose view of life is slightly different from ours. Intelligence is deeply social. As the two zebras in this picture show us, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. Some of you may be familiar with the lovely piece of research that had an individual send out 100 Christmas cards just before that festival to people that he didn't know. Sent them out, 100 Christmas cards, left a little clue on the envelope, which was a return address. 100 Christmas cards sent to people the researcher did not know. Blow me down. How many do you think that researcher received in return? None? That would be a logical explanation. But in fact, 20%, 1 in 5 of those people the researcher sends it to, send the Christmas card back to them saying, well, hi, Bill, how's your year been? Blah, 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 without knowing them at all. Reciprocity, social interaction, confers responsibilities. Think back to us as we evolved. We had to work in tribes, we had to work in groups. That's how we survived years when we didn't have enough food. It's obvious. Of course, it's not just all the 6 things I've been talking about, but the kind of more reflective aspect to what we're talking about. Intelligence is strategic. Intelligence is making time to think about things when perhaps in the past you've not really stopped to think. As Edward Bear says, coming down those stairs, bump, bump, bump on the back of his head behind Christopher Robin in the A.A. Milne book. It is, as far as he knows, the only way of coming downstairs. But somewhere he feels there's another way. If only he could stop for a moment and think of it. We have to teach students to learn about learning and to get better at transferring something they learn in the maths classroom to the English room, to the English classroom, to the sports field, to the kitchen, to the community, etc., etc. I'll be talking a lot about that when I'm in New Zealand. The literature on this is very compelling and very underused in schools. We know a lot about how we can help children learn things in one domain and then use them unprompted in another. We know a lot about that, and I'll look forward to exploring that with you when I'm with you. And finally, of course, as I said at the very beginning, which hardly needs any explanation, intelligence is ethical. What you do is all important, and all important to the survival of our race. So 8 things, 8 aspects of intelligence, which taken together in a very real sense demonstrate, I believe, that we can help kids get smarter. We can help mums and dads and carers get smarter. We can help business people get smarter. This is not confined to any one domain. These are the learning sciences. These are the things that we're learning from a whole range of disciplines. It's been my pleasure and privilege since founding the Centre for Real World Learning at the University of Winchester with my dear friend Guy Claxton, that we need to bring people across the world together to get better at doing this. And we've created something called the Expansive Education Network. You'll see the connection. Learning is learnable, intelligence is expandable, expansive education is the series of processes that help young people systematically expand their capabilities so that they can deal with an uncertain world. If you're interested in that and have a little ferret around, you'll get a sense of some of the things that turn me on, and I hope some of the organizations that may turn you on, and I hope some of the reasons why you might enjoy coming to see me and having a dialogue with me. Penultimate slide now, and I leave this to one of your own eminent thinkers, John Hattie, somebody whose work I admire greatly. At the heart of expansive education are two remarkable senses. One, that if we really want kids to learn more and to attain more, we have to shut up. We have to let them do more. We have to let students become teachers. And we as teachers have to become learners. There has to be a kind of wonderful role reversal between that thing that we thought we were doing when we went into the profession and that thing which we turn out to be doing when we arrive. Now, of course, don't get me wrong. That doesn't mean we simply sit there with our feet up, put our feet up on the chair and watch to see what happens. Oh, no, no, no. Much more subtle than that, of course. If you've liked anything that you've heard here and want to have a little look around, then go to any of these three websites here. The first is the Expansive Education site, which is a global alliance. I'll be stopping off in Australia on my way to see you, and I'll be working in the Melbourne and Sydney area where Deakin University is starting its own expansive learning network. Maybe there's somebody listening now in New Zealand who'd like to be the first pioneer for expansive education and join this growing international family. If you like any of the ideas, there are stacks of papers that you can download for free from the Winchester University site. And finally, the third of those is the Building Learning Power site, which some of you may be familiar with if you want to find out more about that. You've been incredibly generous sitting there or driving there or watching on your mobile device or sitting before you head off for your Tuesday labours. So thank you for that. Thank you for listening. And now I'm going to pause and see if there's anybody who'd like to talk more. Thank you.
Hi there, Bill. It's Danielle. There is a question. I believe Helen's got that for you.
Yes, I've got a couple of questions here for you, Bill. Okay, one from Anna Marie. You suggested that the literature surrounding the importance of learning about learning is robust, but schools underuse these concepts. Why do you think this is?
Gosh, there are lots of reasons. One, it's difficult. So teaching in a way that invites, well, let me backtrack for a second. Once upon a time, when I trained as a teacher, you were told various things. Jokingly, I was told not to smile before half term, but certainly not to admit that I was wrong and not to let the little bugger see how you do things. And of course, the opposite of all of that is true. And what we now know from the literature that, albeit in a complex way, what we need to do is to invite learners to come backstage with us and see how we do things. And of course, how we learn is complicated. So it's not going to be as simple as here's a little addition or subtraction test which we can do now, and we can test you in 5 minutes and blow me down, you've got it. So it's complicated for one. Number two, it's very broad, the area. There's areas that we may be focusing on. I hope you may have got a glimpse of that from my brief presentation. I've covered 8 areas, but there are 20 others I might have done. How we get better at remembering things, how we get better at controlling our emotions, how we get better at doing a whole series of things will, taken together, help us to become better learners. So it's complicated, and it's broad, and it's, in some areas, it's contested. So as I think you may have got a sense of when I just mentioned Howard Gardner very briefly, some people like what he's done and some people don't. Some people think it's not the real business of learning, which is learning subjects, they might say. It's a kind of liberal, fuzzy alternative. And I think one of the things that, and I hold myself partly responsible here along with other academics and practitioners, that sometimes people offer snake oil and quick fixes. And in doing that, they, of course, shoot themselves in the foot. And by doing that, they make it very difficult for these complex issues to be worked through in a complex way. So it's difficult. There are people out there giving us overly easy answers. Bits of it are contested, but that doesn't mean it isn't doable. And I think that's where I'd come back to both the Expansive Education Network and the kind of work that we're associated with in terms of building learning power. There are schools across the world that need to move between the theoretical and the practical. And my answer to anybody, Anne-Marie, would be gently try some of the practical, well-used tools in your, or if you're working with others, in the way that you interact with others' practice, and watch and notice what happens.
Okay, another question here, Bill, from Catherine. Can we add that intelligence is also connected and global through greater use of blogs, social media, etc.?
Absolutely. This might be an aspect of social intelligence or some other kind of intelligence that the names, the phrases, the words aren't really important. I think that we're in a flat world. The fact that here we are now talking from almost the other side of the world to each other, listening to each other, is a classic example of that. And at the moment I'm researching something for the British government looking at practical learning and vocational learning. And one of the things I'm wrestling with is how we bring social media into further education, into vocational education and training. There's no doubt that all of our kids are using it and many of our colleagues are using it. And it's become a ubiquitous feature of our lives. And some of our colleagues will, of course, because we're like that, we're older, resist it, and most of us will be up for embracing it and finding out how we can use it. Here am I using a particular webinar for the first time. Only a few days ago have I learned this, and I can't think of a better way of beginning to communicate. Beginning, note, I say, because of course I need the face-to-face as well. So a big yes. Social network intelligence, I don't know what you call it, and it doesn't matter, is a huge part of what it is to be human in the second decade of the 21st century.
Great. And then just another question come through from Catherine. In New Zealand, the focus has become increasingly on measurability and standardisation, much to the despair of teachers. So how can we get your message to those who have the power and influence over what we do?
Hi, Catherine. Goodness, I send a wave of empathy to you. We're in the same situation here in England with a very curious Secretary of State, Michael Gove, who's trying to turn the clock back in many different ways. And when I said earlier in my talk about how much I admired the capabilities approach that you've adopted over many years in New Zealand, I've watched with some alarm the changes that you're facing, and which I'll learn more about when I come to be with you. I think we just have to hold to the evidence. We have to be robust. We have not, first of all, to be drawn into a silly argument that says it's either about standards and achievement and attainment, or it's about this other stuff that we want to do. We have to show policymakers and politicians and those who take these judgments that you can get better results and teach more imaginatively. And the research is very, very strong on that. The research that, well, your own John Hattie, David Perkins at Harvard, the School Improvement Network at the Institute of Education in London, the research is very, very compelling. There are, in a sense, two games of life. I'll talk a lot about this when I'm with you. The two games of life, or maybe the two games of learning life, are game one is all the kind of standards and tests and examinations, and, you know, we can't not do that. And it was a failure of our maybe our passionate, liberal, educating colleagues in the latter part of the last century that kind of said, well, let's just throw the whole lot out. You can't do that. We've got to get the best, help kids to get the best results by whatever situation they find them, any system they find themselves in. But game 2 is about helping young people to be able to think for themselves, learn from themselves, emote for themselves, do whatever they need to do to deal with whatever they face in an uncertain world. That's expansive education. That's expansive learning. That's learnable intelligence. So I'll be talking a lot about how we can bring these two worlds together, these two games together. And I think we simply have to keep true to that. We have to show, we have to say that the evidence is unimpeachable, that if you teach young people in more imaginative, open-ended, expandable ways, and you are a good and passionate teacher, they will not only become more effective lifelong learners, but they will also get better results. So we have to stop people kind of sidelining us into thinking that it's an either-or. It's both, and we have to be very passionate about holding true to our beliefs.
Great, and I've got no more questions at the moment. Thanks, Bill.
Okay, I'll cut in at this point perhaps. It's Danielle back again. I just want to say thanks very much, Bill, for that. I think that's given us a fantastic introduction to what you're going to be discussing later on when you're out here, and we can get that face-to-face that you've been talking about. You'll be delving into all those matters, I'm sure, in more detail and giving us the chance to expand our own intelligence, I'm sure. If everybody out there in the audience just wants to check their screens, those sessions are up there now. Bill's doing a series of breakfasts and workshops, and they're in Whangarei, North Shore, and out here in West Auckland as well. So you can get the full story on our website. Of course, there's limited spaces, so if you'd like to make a booking for these and actually get to meet the fabulous Bill Lucas in person, then I suggest you call us quickly here at Learning Network, or just register online. I will be sending a link from out to you all so that you can access that via our website, and there'll be more information about these dates. So next slide, right, so just keep in touch with us, and as I said, I will be sending you a link shortly. This webinar is also going to be available as a YouTube video, so you'll receive details about that. I'd like to say a huge thank you to Bill for giving up his time to work with us today. We're very much looking forward to
pleasure. An absolute pleasure, and I'm really, really looking forward to seeing you guys in New Zealand. My family are going to come out too, and it's a dream for us to come and see your lovely North Island.
Fantastic. I'm sure it won't disappoint. We're very much looking forward to catching up with you in person too at the end of October. Everybody else out there in the audience, this was our last webinar for 2012, but we have plenty planned for 2013, so please be sure to keep in touch with the Learning Network, as we'll pass those details on as soon as our calendar for next year is confirmed. Everybody, thank you again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day. We'll end there.
Great, thanks, and I'll end the webinar for everybody now. So counting you out, 4, 3, 2, 1, have a great day.